Welcome, everyone. Looks like most people are here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Today, we're going to be talking about what's new with Windows Server 2025. Based on Microsoft's history, we expect this will probably be coming out within the next couple months. They normally release in the fall before the namesake of the version. Today, we're going to be talking about a bunch of acronyms. So, LAPS, Local Administrator Password Solution, Windows Admin Center, Secure Socket Shell, or Secure Shell, sorry, Active Directory Improvements, Delegated Managed Service Accounts, and then all the other service accounts to go with them. Hot Patching, Failover Cluster Manager, Hyper-V, Containers, NVMe, Non-Volatile Memory Express, Resilient File System, Storage Replica, Storage Spaces Direct, SMB, Server Message Block, ARC, which actually doesn't stand for anything apparently, which really surprised me, and then a few various odds and ends that don't fall in any one bucket, and then how you actually upgrade to this version, which is kind of interesting this time. Disclaimer. So the information gathered here has been picked up over the last 6 months. Some of this may have changed. Some may change between today and official launch. I've not been able to personally test everything in this release because it's very wide across a lot of different functionalities. There's a possibility I misunderstood something. If something sounds cool to you and interesting for your business, go look it up, make sure you know how it works, and test it before you put it in production. And as always, I may disparage Microsoft offhandedly. Please don't sue me. So, moving into it, the general idea of Server 2025. Microsoft's always kind of had three core tenets: compatibility, performance, and security. These used to be ordered in compatibility, performance, and then not really worried about security. Think back to like Windows XP, Vista. When those OSs were out, the big thing was that everything worked with them. You could just plug in a printer and it would actually pull a driver and function. And that was their big focus, was to get it to that state. Before that, in Windows 98, you plug a printer in, you sit around fighting it for 4 hours to maybe get it to work. Then, after the Vista fun, Microsoft kind of changed their focus to performance, compatibility, security. Vista had performance issues because people kept running it on potato chips. So Windows 7, the big thing, if you remember in that release, was performance, performance, performance. And that's been the big focus for the last several releases. Every time we talked in one of these, it was always about, oh, it's 30% faster. Oh, this is half as latent as it was, so on and so forth. Now the focus of Microsoft is solidly on security. It's security, performance, compatibility. And with that, there's a bunch of low-hanging fruit that they are targeting. NTLM authentication. NTLM, if you don't know what it stands for, is NT Land Manager. The NT part of that tells you kind of how old this is. We're going back over 20 years for this authentication mechanism. They're working on getting away from it. They've been working on it. Now they're focusing on it. Mail slots. Mail slots are really fun. It's this open little bit of RAM where you can stick stuff. It's been around for quite a while. And they're also working on updating all the cryptographic methods. So some of these presentations or some of these different topics are just going to be, hey, this now uses a better TLS. And then some of them are going to be more in-depth. But before we get to that, quick poll question on mail slots. This will pop up in front of you. When did mail slots come out? If you don't even know what they are, that should probably give you an idea. If you've never heard of it, well, take a guess, because this is something that's being deprecated massively right now in 2025 in multiple different ways. Give everybody just a few seconds. This is mostly to keep it interesting and actually keep you guys engaged. So, all right, looks like most people are saying NT4, bouncing around a little bit. Mail slots actually came out in DOS LAN Manager. This technology has been around since pre-Windows time. It's ancient. It is essentially 424 bytes of space open in your system that can be used to exchange messages. If you remember way back when you did a net send to a computer name and put something in, that was using mail slots. This is ancient technology, but all the way up through 2022, this is still technically enabled. This goes back to how all of our jobs are based on ancient technology that we're just kind of duct taping together to keep working. All right, moving in, Microsoft Laps, or sorry, Windows Laps, not to be confused with Microsoft Laps. Microsoft hates us all with their naming. So Windows Laps is the new version of Microsoft Laps. This isn't exclusive to 2025. You can use it on 2019, 2022, but it's coming out at the time of 2025. So we're going to hit on it because it's really cool. What Windows Laps does, is, or Microsoft, it automatically makes a unique password for your local admin account, and it updates that frequently and stores it in AD. So if you've got 1,000 workstations out there, rather than having the same local admin on all of them, or having one that somebody's manually changing, or God help, you're putting it in a GPO or a PowerShell that's going out and changing it for you, what this will do is automatically change that password for all those accounts and store it in AD. So if you lose an admin or something, you don't have to worry about, oh, they had the local admin to every workstation. Oh no. Windows Labs can also rename the admin account or create a random one. So you can make it to where every local user or local admin is a random name and random password that's stored in AD. It can also back up the DSRM password, because I'm sure nobody on this presentation has ever lost that DSRM password, or it was set 20 years ago when a server was set up and nobody ever knew it. It can do image rollback detection. One of the big problems with Microsoft Laps, if you ever used it, was if you ever restored a computer from backup, it might have an old password on it from a previous change. Well, now it's already been changed since that backup, and so now I can't log into it. So now with Windows Laps, it will detect that if the computer rolls back, and it'll automatically force a new update of the password so that you can log back in with a current accurate password. It can also generate passphrases instead of passwords. So this goes back to what everybody's been talking about a lot recently, is it's way more important to have a longer password than it is to have a short password that's crazy complicated. So you can set both the complexity of words as well as a number of words for this passphrase, and it'll automatically make it for you. If you're not familiar with it, there's a great XKCD comic on this and how to properly make a password nowadays. Windows Laps also has a new tab in Active Directory users and computers. One of the big problems with Microsoft Laps was it was really hard to get the passwords out in the future when you tried to use it. Seemed like it shouldn't be a big deal, but Microsoft made it a big deal. If you tried to do it in Active Directory users and computers, it was buried in like one of the ADSI tabs, basically. You had to dig down through all these fields. You had to find it. It was super hard to read because of how it was written in there. The font wasn't clear. It wasn't a good font. And also they used like lowercase l, uppercase I, 0 and O, so you couldn't see it clearly. So if there was an incident, like say, I don't know, a global security company took down all the computers in your organization, you had to log back into each of them in safe mode to try to delete a file, then it was really hard to put those passwords in because they were hard to read in the first place. And you didn't have any passphrases. There's also now going to be a WAC plugin, Windows Admin Center. Great tool. You should play with it. We're going to talk about it in a minute. But this plugin will actually let you see them all in Windows Admin Center, and it can actually even pipe those passwords in. So if you want to do an RDS to a box, if you're in Windows Admin Center, you can say RDS with the local admin password. It'll pipe that into the RDS connection and connect you automatically to it with that admin password. So really cool. Windows Laps fixes most all the main problems we had with Microsoft Laps before. Big improvement. Again, not exclusive to 2025, just the time. Speaking of Windows Admin Center, there's a new version of it coming. It's colloquially termed WAC v2. There isn't actually a new version of it. This is an evergreen product. They release multiple versions of a year, but this one's a big one. It also doesn't require Server 2025. But the big thing is they're upgrading from .NET Core 6 to 8. What this gets us is HTTP2, which is way faster. It reduces latency, improves performance, better security because, once again, enhanced cryptography, all the new TLS 1.3 and all that other type stuff that comes with some of these newer versions. There's better cross-platform support. It's up to twice as fast. They've shown some live demos of this where they opened it in the old Windows Admin Center and it took like 10 seconds, and then the new it took 5, or some things were like 3 and 1. So it is significantly faster than it was before as well, which was one of the annoying things about it. One of the ways they've done that is they've basically turned it into microservices instead of a monolithic. Before it was a monolithic process. So things could get bogged down waiting for something else to process. Now it's microservices, so it can scale out and use more CPU to get things processed timely. There's a lot of VM management improvements. That's one of the biggest things people use this for, is managing VMs and clusters, and they've made a lot of improvements there. And there's a better installer. So before, the installer was very basic. You did the full install, then you went back and actually did all your settings. Now you can make a lot of those settings during the install, which is something so simple that it should have been there all along. But either way, we got it now. SSH. OpenSSH is built in. OpenSSH has been around. It also doesn't require 2025. 2019, 2022 can use it, but it's now built into Server 2025. When you open the computer and Server Manager pops up, right below Remote Desktop and Firewall, there's now a setting for Turn on SSH. It makes an OpenSSH users group, local users group, that you can put people on, just like the RDS users group. And then you can connect to the server with SSH. In PowerShell, you can do SSH, domain username at server name. You can SFTP to it, and you can PuTTY into it like normal people do SSH. So this allows you to connect to it just same way you would connect to your Linux boxes, which is kind of nice to have a unified thing there. You can also set up SSH keys instead of using a username password. So once you build one of these, you basically point it to your key file, and it lets you log in using basically a key for your username password instead of having to type it all out. One of the things Microsoft cites as the reason they did this is because it makes automation much easier. If you're trying to run any large automations that are going between, some things are on Linux boxes, some are on Windows boxes, well, it can all now run over SSH, so it can kind of unify how you're accessing those to run that automation. It can also, SSH supports the ability to basically tunnel other protocols, port forwarding, for lack of a better way of putting it. So you can have RDP connect over SSH. So SSH is generally considered pretty secure. Yes, things come up all the time, and some of the big hacking conferences, of course, they find holes in everything at those. But you can basically run RDP over SSH. So RDP already has its own security, and now you're putting SSH on top of that security. So you're basically doubling your security layers. You can also do PowerShell over SSH. So basically, it's another way to connect to your servers, trying to make that as simple and variable as possible. On to the stuff that's actually 2025 specific. Active Directory. There's a lot with Active Directory. Some of this is really interesting, some of it's boring, and we're going to go through it real quick. One of the big things is 32K page size for the database. So Active Directory has had the same 8K page size since it came out in Windows 2000. The page size is basically how the database stores the information you give it. So if I make a user called Brent Earls, that user account is stored in a page. If I have other attributes I want to put on that person, such as address and manager and I don't know, email accounts, all the stuff that comes with Intra ID, it can start taking more and more space to where 8K pages don't store it all. So then what I have to do is have that 8K page for that user that then links to other 8K pages that store the rest of that user's metadata. So that, of course, means that instead of pulling one thing, I'm like searching to find multiple things. It slows everything down. Also, we have way more storage and RAM than we did in the year 2000, so having super small pages isn't that useful to us. So we now get 32K pages. You can install any new DCs in 32K page mode with backwards compatibility, or an 8K page if you want to keep them that way. If you upgrade a DC in place, it still uses the 8K page. I never recommend doing that anyway, but this is for new DCs built. Once all the DCs in your forest are on 2025 with the 32K page compatibility mode, you can upgrade them all to use native 32K. So that's kind of like 512E versus 4K on hard drives. You got to have everything playing nicely to be able to move everything. So that's a pretty big one from a performance and overall functionality standpoint. There's a new schema with this version. It focuses largely on improvements with intra-ID synchronization, but this is our first schema update since 2016. It's been a long time. So got a new one with some new stuff in it, which means, once again, forest prep, domain prep, and then update once you get everybody up there. AD object repair. So a few very specific things that could go missing in AD objects before that were nearly unfixable. SAM account type and being missing, an object category being missing can now be fixed. There's commands for that to actually fix those. SAM account type obviously being rather important. DC location algorithm improvements. Doesn't that sound fun? What this is for is allowing you to find a domain by DNS name. So for example, Contoso, if you just type in contoso/Brent then that's using the NetBIOS name of the domain, not the DNS name. This workstation knows to send that to the DNS server. The DNS server then has to translate Contoso to corp.contoso.com or whatever your domain is. So there's a lot of improvements with 2025 on this. You can actually do user-defined rules for this, where you can set your own NetBIOS that resolves to a domain. So maybe you did a domain migration and people keep still typing in the old domain, or maybe there's a common fat finger for the NetBIOS. You can actually update some of these yourself. It also caches all the trusting domains NetBIOS names so that we can force those over to DNS as well. Again, we're trying to get rid of legacy stuff that's not secure. NetBIOS is very, very, very legacy. So this is another way to improve this so that we can get away from NetBIOS in every way, shape, form, or fashion. Here's where we start going into the fun stuff. As I mentioned, there's new forest and domain functional levels. According to Microsoft, these require server 2016 or later. They always say this, that you can't, add this to a domain that's running older than what's currently supported. Like if you had a bunch of 2012 DCs, they are always like, oh no, you must be on 2016 to add this new domain controller. Never once seen it break, never once seen it cause problems, not to say it doesn't. So technically speaking, you have all your DCs on 2016 before you do your AD and DC prep, AD and domain and forest prep. Wow. To be able to install your new DCs. There's improved algorithms for name and SID lookups. This is basically just, again, security. It used to use LSA and NetLogon. NetLogon is, again, an old protocol from 2000. It doesn't use that anymore. Now it uses Kerberos and DC Locator. So that's good. Here's a weird one that came up in all the search for this that terrifies me about how this might be set up now. So AD now uses random generated default computer account passwords as opposed to using the computer account name. We think there's nothing on the internet about this. We think this is if you pre-make a computer account, it just sets the machine password to the same thing as the actual machine name. And when that machine joins, that's when it changes it. But not 100% sure because there's nothing on the internet, but the way they cited this improvement is kind of odd. DCs and ADLDS, lightweight directory services, now require encryption for searching and changing important fields. Forever you could just do LDAP to things and it would work. Well, now it actually does require LDAP-S. So better figure out how to set that up and make it work right. Again, just a minor thing. A lot of people are already doing it, but yeah. Then we move on to some really specific ones. Not even going to read this one because these are straight from Microsoft and they're very boring. But PKINT protocol now has extra security with it. LAN manager GPO settings about password storage. This is just going away because you can't store those hashes anymore. So that's good. More important things, LDAP encryption by default, as I mentioned, using SASL and LDAP sealing. So as you're connecting to things, it does require encryption on these things. It automatically defaults to it. You can technically turn it off if you want, but you should not. LDAP supports TLS 1.3 now, which is good. Extra security once again. Legacy SAM RPC password change methods are blocked by default. Again, that's nothing I care about. And then Active Directory now supports NUMA. So, and it supports more than 64 cores. This seems like it would make no difference to anybody because who needs more than 64 cores for Active Directory? Well, probably no one except for Microsoft. However, if you think about it from a NUMA support standpoint, if you had like a little box that was a physical DC that only had 2 4-core processors, that means that no matter how heavily your AD was pressed, it could never use more than 4 processor cores. So this allows us to get the use of all the cores in the box and scale up AD performance, and there's extra performance counters for it. So again, doesn't affect a lot of people, but it's kind of just nice to know that they are paying attention to us people with on-prem stuff. And then some cool stuff, replication priority order. So if you've ever dealt with replication priority, you know it's kind of draconian in how it works. Again, this was all made back in like before 2000s. That's when it all came out. So it's currently priority based. There's some hard-coded stuff. Intra-site links always have a higher priority. Now you can increase the system calculated replication priorities for specific partners and specific naming contexts using a replication priority boost. So what does that mean practically? Well, if I've got a DC at a site and I know that DC is built, it's on 2025, it's on new hardware, it's my best one, I can prioritize that for replication. I can also say, like, oh, I'm about to do my initial AD sync. I want to make sure that this box syncs off that box. Maybe I know something that the algorithm can't figure out. Like, yeah, all your partners are at remote sites, but this site I know has a really good link, but not just that site generically, this DC at that site. So you can be very specific about how you're prioritizing replication now and getting this into a more modern thing. All these priorities go into the overall calculations and then it figures things out for you. So, quick poll question. Once again, let's see if everybody's awake. This one's on service accounts. So how do you make service accounts specifically? Do you create an account in AD, set a password, make it an admin on the server? Do you make it an AD, restrict all permissions, assign explicit permissions as needed on the server? Do you just have a service account that floats out there that you use for everything? Or do you actually use things like GMSAs or other specific ways to make service accounts? So far, looks like most people make an AD account manually and permission it. All right, getting good feedback. Thank you guys for actually playing along. So I asked this because our next topic is going to be on delegated managed service accounts. This is a brand new type of service account that is only in 2025. But to talk about it, I kind of have to talk about how we got here and the previous service account methodologies Microsoft has made. So we started out with virtual accounts. These came out in 2008 R2. It's in a single computer. There's not really a password managed because it's a virtual account. You mostly saw this with like SQL Server, because when you install SQL Server, it makes a service for that called NT service slash MSSQL server, or whatever your instance name is. These aren't these are called virtual because they're not really there. If that service account needs to access any network resources or other things, then it does the computer machine account for its authentication. But so these added a little bit of isolation, but not true good service account level isolation. Also with 2008 R2, we got standalone managed service accounts. Standalone managed service accounts were within a single computer, but it did actually change the password automatically and store it for you. These couldn't be shared within computers, so there were still a lot of limitations on them and how you actually could use them. Then in 2012, we got group managed service accounts, so GMSAs. These are used across multiple computers, and AD controls the password and the updates. This was great if I had like an application server farm that all access to SQL Server. So like my ERP, I've got all these application servers. They have services that need to run as an account that accesses my ERP. Well, I could use a GMSA to have all those using the same account. It's still automatically password updated and stored in AD, but instead it was able to be accessed for all those computers. Well, now we have another version called delegated managed service accounts. This is new for 2025. This actually makes a machine account instead of a traditional service account, and then permissions to that machine account are delegated to the actual server name. So like, for example, if I have a server named server 1 and I make a DMSA on it, it's going to make another machine account for the service account, and only server 1's machine account has access to it. So now this is specific to that server. Only that server can use that account, but it's stored in AD, it's centrally managed, it automatically rotates, and it prevents the situation where with the group managed service accounts, for example, someone could actually change the password and get into it and access it, or since it was on multiple computers had access to the account, and bad things can happen from that. This basically restricts all that and gets it down to only that machine can do it, and it's a specific type of account. So it adds extra layers of security. Stolen straight from service accounts on Microsoft Learn, this little table kind of shows the different times to use which service accounts. These were Microsoft's criteria, so take some of them with a grain of salt. But DMSAs are really, really, really good if you have service accounts that are isolated to single machines. Essentially, Microsoft's guidance now is all service accounts should either be a DMSA if it's on a single machine, or a GMSA if it's across multiple machines, like a cluster, for example. Those are pretty much the way forward for everything. They are the most secure ways of doing those respective things. Of course, anytime a computer account is shared across multiple machines, it is inherently less secure, which is why the high security scenario doesn't have GMSA in it. So that's cool. Hot patching. We talked about this for the 2022 release, if you were in that one, but it was only available in Azure Edition. But now it's available in normal people editions. This is what all you Linux people are going to say, oh, how clever. It can modify memory code without a reboot. So the ability to patch security things without rebooting your server. It's not for evergreen yet. There are quarterly baselines that do require a reboot, but then monthly patches don't. So essentially right now, this step into the water is instead of 12 reboots a year to get all your security patches, there's 4. So it's something. With all good things, there must be a negative. You have to either be running this in Azure Edition or running Azure Arc to manage your server, which is a paid subscription. It's not crazy expensive, but you only get to use this functionality if you are in some way tethered to Azure. So it's now in all the versions, and you can run it on-prem, even if you're not on Azure Stack, but you still at least have to talk to Azure. Gotta get their money somehow. Here's a quick diagram, again, taken from a presentation on this, where it kind of shows how those baselines work. So like in January, you put a full baseline security patch on. Then February and March, you can just do hot patches, no reboots required, get your security needs taken care of. April, you do another patch. May, June, you don't have to reboot, so on and so forth. I am certain that over time, this will become more widespread, and we will get to the point where that becomes probably 6 months and then a year, and so on and so forth. Either way, it's better than nothing. Failover clustering. So there's quite a few new things here. Cluster-aware updating got a lot of reliability and performance improvements, which is good because it was a little janky before. You can now do feature update and cluster-aware update. Not to spoil the last slide of this, but upgrading to Windows Server 2025 can be a feature update of an existing Windows Server. Yes, I panicked as well. Moving on. There's some more Azure Stack features coming down to 2025. You can do single node clusters. There's certain functionality of boxes that need a cluster to actually go. And you could make single node clusters in some of the Azure Stack stuff, but you couldn't in normal servers long term for these things. So that's coming down. You're also able to do storage spaces direct stretched clusters. So essentially, if I've got a campus and I want storage spaces direct in building 1 and building 2, I want each of those buildings to be self-contained, but also able to get resiliency from the other. That type of functionality is here. Workgroup clusters, these have always kind of been hanging out on the edge for Microsoft. These are clusters where you don't join them to the domain. They kind of work. They've never been great. There's always been limitations. Well, you can now do live migration on workgroup clusters with certs for your authentication. So that's one more thing that'll make easier. Failover clustering, if you have GPUs, a GPU specifically, attached to a VM, you can now live migrate those. We'll talk about that in a second. And then ExcelNet, which is essentially fancy SRIOV, where networking for a VM bypasses the virtual switch. Someone did mention is rebootless patching opening a brand new potential vector for hacking attacks, or is it the same or is it the same, just a different way of doing it? I would defer to all our Linux friends who have been doing this for 20 years on whether or not it actually opens new vectors or not. I don't personally know, honestly. Hyper-V. So there's quite a few new things with Hyper-V. I wanted to put this quote in here first because people keep talking like Microsoft's abandoning Hyper-V. But this quote was from Eldon Christensen. He is the principal product manager in the Core OS groups. And basically what he said is Hyper-V is vital to everything Microsoft's doing. It's in all of these different products and it's not going anywhere. And basically he's the leader of Windows Server. And he's like, no, this isn't going anywhere. This is staying here. So I put that in just because that question comes up quite a bit. So what's new with Hyper-V? GPU partitioning. So this is where you can take a GPU, carve it into like 4 baby GPUs, and then each of those GPUs gets served up to a different VM. So a lot of people might be doing this with like VMware Horizons. This supports live migration now as well. So there was actually a really cool demo of this in one of the Windows Server Summit presentations where they ran Cyberpunk on a VM. And when they vMotioned that VM, there was a 10% performance drop for about 30 seconds, a 3-second stun as it cut over, and then the VM was running on another box. Obviously, that slowdown isn't fully optimal, but the fact that you can move something GPU intensive from one box to another without having to take it down is really cool. GPU discrete device assignment. This is basically where you can make a pool of GPUs and then VMs can just pull from that pool of GPUs. So for example, maybe you've got a bunch of CAD workers and they really need a lot of GPU, but they work staggered times. You can basically have it to where you have a pool of GPUs. When that person turns their VM on, it boots it up, picks the next GPU, gives it the full GPU so they get all the horsepower, but then gives it back when they're not using it. This also allows you to move from one host to another. This one is a longer VM stun, so it's not as cool as the live migration up above, but you can actually move it. If all this sounds familiar, RemoteFX used to do this. The GPU-G functionality was part of RemoteFX vGPUs. I think that came out in 2016. They disabled it in 2019, the year, not the server version, because they basically found security vulnerabilities in it that were so architectural, they could not fix them. So this is noteworthy because everything needs GPUs now. It's here. Dynamic processor compatibility. If you've ever used VMware's dynamic processor compatibility, you know there's loads of settings. EVC has a setting for every processor generation from Intel, every processor generation from AMD. If you use dynamic processor compatibility in Hyper-V, you check a box and you're done. By Microsoft's own admission, the way they were making that processor compatibility work was rather draconian. They were hiding more feature sets than they necessarily needed to. So now this is going to look at your cluster, figure out what all's in that cluster, and be extremely granular on exactly what feature sets it hides, and make sure that you get the most out of your CPUs. And then the thing that all of us were the most worried about is now we can put 2048 CPUs into a VM. I mean, I just ran into this weekly as a problem, and thankfully they increased it. And you can also put, a 1/4 petabyte of RAM on a VM now. I don't know what systems they use to test this, but I'd really like to see them someday. All right, another quick poll question on containers. This one is more specifically just so I know for future edification. I don't run into a lot of containers. I hear a lot of people talk about them, but not really use them. So I have a little bit in here, but I didn't put a whole lot. And I wanted to see if this is something you guys want to hear more about in the future, or if it's a thing that you're just not getting a lot of exposure to. And as expected, largely vendors hate you because vendors won't redevelop their software for it, or people playing around with it on their own desktops. Few people using it for servers, but not many. Cool. We have new container functionality with 2025. I didn't put a whole lot in here about it because people seem to use it. You can move containers from 2022 to 2025 without upgrading the base image now. So it makes it easier to be mobile across different versions. They reduce the image size, so the containers are even smaller, or the container base images are even smaller now to make booting, moving, changing things even faster. They reduced the image size, and they made some new features on demand to add more application compatibility, basically making it larger again. And then there's also performance improvements. SMB, there's a lot here. Gonna try to go quick because we only have 20 minutes left. SMB signing. This is basically, essentially I get ready to send you something on SMB. I sign and say, hey, I'm Brent. And you can validate that I am Brent when you get it. This has been around for a while, but it hasn't really been required. It stops some of the most common relay, attack in the middle, man in the middle type attacks. It was previously required for DC shares. If you're talking to the netlogon folder, then you had to actually have signing going because that's an important folder to not be interrupted on. But now it's going to be required in most cases. So Windows clients talking to a server require the server to be signed. So if I'm on Windows 11, I'm talking to a 2022 server or 2025 server, I'm now going to require that server to sign stuff for me. Windows servers talking to a client request the client be signed. So if I'm a server, I'm going to go, hey, would you please sign your stuff when you send it? If you say no, I let you go. Why is that? Well, what if I'm running on Linux? and I don't support the version of SMB that allows me to do signing. So the server asks politely, and if someone can't do it, then it doesn't require it. Server to server is not required by default, which sounds weird until you think about the fact that there is a performance hit with signing. Everything has a performance hit. It can be up to 15%. So if I'm a desktop and I'm sending a file up to the server and it's going to take 10 seconds to transfer that file, well, 15% performance hits now going to take 11.5 seconds. Not a big deal. If I'm two servers doing storage replica and I'm transferring terabytes of data and it's going to take 100 minutes, well, now it's 111 minutes or 115 minutes. So that is actually a more noteworthy thing. Also, theoretically, your servers are in one of your more protected areas, but it's not on by default. You can turn it on if you want. But SMB signing is one of the big security things we're pushing forward. SMB compression might offset your performance loss. SMB auth rate limiter, basically this just keeps people from brute forcing passwords for SMB. By previously, if I wanted to guess 1,000 SMB passwords, or 1,000 passwords a second against an SMB share, it would let me do that. Now there's a 2-second delay between authentications. So if I'm a legit user and I type my password wrong, well, 2 seconds is about how long it's going to take me to click OK, type it in again, put my password in and hit OK again. No difference to me as a user for it. If I'm trying to send massive amounts of authentications though, that's going to slow it down massively. So a big thing to stop brute force attacks. SMB firewall rule hardening. If you've ever paid attention, right now when you make a new file share or install the role, it opens like 15 ports. It opens 445, 5445, which is the iWarp SMB RDMA. But it also currently opens all the NetBIOS ports. Once again, ancient technology. Right now in 2025, it's not going to open those NetBIOS ports. Again, trying to get rid of that NT stuff. In the future versions, 2028 presumably, it also won't open ICMP, LLMNR, which is link local something multicast name resolution, and spooler RPC. So all that stuff will also go away in the future. And now we also have SMB dialect control, which is basically where you can set a minimum and maximum version of SMB. So I can say people can only authenticate or can only use SMB if they're on version 3, for example. SMB1 clients finally been disabled on Windows Home Edition by default. They've been working their way down through all these over the years. 8 years ago, so 2016, 45% of all SMB traffic was still SMB1. SMB1 is slow. It has no security to speak of. Clear text, basically, for everything. Very weak authentication. But over the last 8 years, it's gone from 45% to 0.25%. Ned Pyle from Microsoft actually made this SMB1 product clearinghouse where he publicly shames every vendor that still requires SMB1. It's kind of amusing to go to just for your own personal fun. SMB guest auth. This is where if you want to go to your Synology NAS, you can connect to it without putting in a username and password. This is a horrible thing to do. It's now off and started turning it off in server, then enterprise and pro. Now it's only available in home. It is still available in home, but it will be going away sometime. Another quick poll question. QUIC. Have you heard of the technology QUIC? And do you know how it works? This is basically whether or not I need to explain this real quick because we're short on time, or if we just burn through it. And already telling that I need to explain it. Cool. All right, QUIC. QUIC is a industry standard protocol. It's been available for years. A lot of people already use QUIC. QUIC's role, as it's been defined in the RFCs, is to replace TCP. So that's probably not what you expected me to finish the sentence with. So TCP/IP, QUIC is to replace the TCP portion of that. And it kind of makes sense. If you think about how TCP works, it's chatty as can be. Every single packet I have to say, I got it. Okay, good, move on. I'm constantly doing all this back and forth chatter, but if I've got a good connection, that's just wasted traffic. Plus, I'm waiting for all of that. So what QUIC does is QUIC actually runs on UDP, and it relies on a higher level protocol up at the, closer to application layer to actually take care of your loss control. So it runs on UDP, which makes it insanely faster. And it's already been used by a whole lot of people. So like if you use Chrome, pretty much all the stuff you do in Chrome that talks to Google proper, the mothership, all uses QUIC. There's loads of other people who are using this. So SMB over QUIC came out in Server 2022. It was available in Standard Data Center and Azure Edition. It runs on port 443, as QUIC does. As I said, UDP instead of TCP. Doesn't require a VPN, always encrypted, TLS 1.3. This is cool because if you've got those mobile users, this basically allows you where they don't have to connect to a VPN. And if you've used SMB over a VPN, it's still pretty trash because it's not designed for those latent, low bandwidth connections, really. So this is now available as an option, and you can use this for non-Azure servers if you want. They're also slowly turning off legacy stuff. I mentioned at the very beginning, SMB remote mail slots. In addition to turning off mail slots in Active Directory for stuff, they're now turning off SMB remote mail slots. So it was a function of SMB1, but that little completely unsecured 424 byte bit of memory was still available if you were using SMB1 and using this feature. It's off now. Thank goodness. One less thing from the 80s we have to worry about. Moving on, storage. ReFS, dedupe, and compression. So we've had dedupe and compression on NTFS. We've had, depending on how you were running your server, you might have seen some ReFS dedupe over time, but this is now here. It is post-processing. It's fully schedulable. Microsoft's wonderful numbers about what you're going to say and how much latency it's going to add. Obviously, your mileage will vary on all this. It only runs on new data. So if you upgrade a server from 2022 to 2025, the data that's already there is not going to be ran. You can have it run dedupe only, compression only, or both. The key thing with this is it scales up way better than previous versions of Windows dedupe. If you dealt with the old dedupes, you know that you would sit there and it would peg one core of one processor at a whole lot of utilization. But if you had 14 volumes, you would still struggle to get it to actually scale up. One of my friends ran this on all flash, SATA flash, not SAS or NVMe, but all flash arrays. And he was saturating 10 cores and 72 gigs of RAM and getting really good compression, dedupe, and performance out of it. So that's there as a feature. It's still not going to beat your pure SAN for performance, but you can now turn this on for ReFS storage. Random stuff, storage replica. Storage replica got a new type of log, an enhanced log. This is a raw format log, which allows it to do concurrent I/O to the secondary volume. So essentially just scaling out width-wise how storage replica does its logging. And it supports compression. So this basically just makes it a lot faster. Storage space is direct, now supports thin provisioned volumes. And it also has an adjustable storage repair and resync speed. So before, if a node went down and came back up, it would just slam all the remaining nodes to try to get that one recovered as fast as possible. You couldn't really control it. Now there's 5 speeds, basically all the way from get it done immediately to don't DOS the rest of my servers to get it done immediately. So you can basically slow that down. I think this is our last poll question on NVMe. Do you know what NVMe is? Do I actually need to explain this, or do you already have it? And this is NVMe technology, not just the NVMe that's in your laptop. All right, can already tell this probably also needs quick explanation. NVMe is non-volatile memory express. This is a new protocol stack for accessing storage. ATA and SCSI came out in the late 70s and 80s respectively. They were based on extraordinarily slow storage and compute. There's a lot of back and forth talk in it, kind of like we were talking about TCP, where the server has to be like, hey, I want to write data. Are you good? Yeah, I'm good. How much do you want to write? Oh, I want to write 5 megs. Do you have room for that? Yeah, I got 5 megs. Send me some. Cool, here it is. Did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? NVMe cuts all the banter out. The server goes, hey, here's 5 megs, write it. And the storage does and says, did it. It cuts the protocol stack down massively. It's built for low latency, high bandwidth connections with loads of CPU and memory that we have now. So it pretty much makes everything that runs on it faster. This is why storage in laptops is insane now, because pretty much all of it's running on NVMe drives anymore, which are just orders of magnitude faster. NVMe in a laptop or desktop runs straight on the PCIe bus, so you can get like 40 gigabytes of storage performance out of your laptop pretty easily now. With Server 2025, Microsoft's been focusing on NVMe for both local and remote storage. So there's a lot of optimizations to how NVMe drives are used in Server 2025. With the GA version, they're expecting 70% more IOPS. They've had that in multiple tests. They already have a patch that's going to come out after 2025 comes out that will get that up to 90% better performance versus 2022. So big performance uplift. And while doing that, it also lowers the CPU utilization. A lot of this is because operating systems are used to having to wait for the storage. Now that the storage is so fast, the operating system still tries to wait, but then the storage is already answered. So they're basically having to redesign how the OS deals with insanely fast storage. NVMe OF, that's NVMe over Fabric. So like taking fiber channel switches or Ethernet switches and running NVMe as your protocol stack on instead of fiber channel, the protocol, or iSCSI or SMB, running native NVMe connectivity for that stuff now. It supports TCP now. It added TCP for it. There is RDMA coming in a future release, but there is a native NVMe initiator now. So you can spin up a native software NVMe initiator, just like you can do a native iSCSI initiator. So it makes it a lot easier to connect to NVMe storage. Various items. Azure Arc is installed by default in 2025, which means everyone's going to be angry because in your notification area, you now have a little red circle that says something's wrong because you haven't connected the server to Azure Arc. You can disable that. But by default, Azure Arc is installed on everything by default because they want you to connect all these to Azure so they can get their monthly fee. Desktop shell. When you first sign into Windows, it now acts more like Windows 11 as far as setting you up to your session. That's apparently good for someone. RDS probably would like that, but for normal people, that would just annoy me. Feedback hub is now there, so you can scream into the void through an easier system than you were before. The 7-zip and tar compression options that we got in Windows 11 are now going to be in 2025. So when you export those logs from the Linux box and they come back as a tar and you scream in anger at having to try to go get a tool to untar, now it's there. Hyper-V Manager finally defaults to Generation 2. For the last decade, you shouldn't have used anything but Generation 2 VMs. Now it defaults to them. RAS support, this one made me laugh. RAS doesn't support PPTP and L2TP by default now, only SSTP and IKV2. When I took my MCSE in 2003, every single security question around RAS was just L2TP because it was the latest, greatest thing. And it's been natively supported as the best protocol ever since, even though SSTP and IKV2 were available. We have a modern task manager, the one you're used to from Windows 11. So now you can see more details on some of the things or be angry at it, depending on how you feel about that task manager. Windows Terminal is now on by default, so you get that nicer single click open PowerShell or open command line or whatever. WinGet's installed by default. If you haven't looked at WinGet, this is a really cool technology. It's almost like a Windows store for server or apt-get in Linux. But you can basically run a WinGet and it goes to a Microsoft certified page of approved apps that they theoretically have checked that you can just install. So if you want to put Putty on a server, you can WinGet and install Putty and it be done versus searching for it and finding it. You can control all those settings via GPO. You can approve what repositories it allows it to pull from, including set your own repositories. But it's installed by default now. As with everything, you can turn it off. Local KDC. So we talked about getting rid of NTLM. NTLM's been built into Windows forever, basically. Now there's going to be a local KDC. So you can actually use Kerberos to authenticate your local accounts. And it's not talking to AD for it. It's running Kerberos inside the server to log people in with local accounts. Credential Guard is now here. So this uses Secure Boot virtualization-based security to protect the hashes and your Kerberos TGTs. This has been in Windows for a while. This was one of the big reasons that we need to get TPMs and servers and get servers moving in that direction, was so we can have things like Credential Guard to protect passwords and tokens even more securely. And you can now get your licenses as a subscription. They are not getting rid of any current licensing models. You can still buy through volume license or your EA. You can still buy perpetual. You can still choose not to get SA if you don't want SA. This is another way of buying a license. They were very, very, very adamant about that. So if you have a short-term need, you can just get a license on a subscription now. Server on desktop. There's weird features coming to 2025, and I don't know any way to describe them except for running your desktop with a server OS. Dev drive is a separate drive for basically making it easier to do development and copy stuff around with ReFS and things. That's in server 2025 now. Bluetooth is being allowed to be turned on. It is not on by default. Doesn't matter. No servers I've ever seen actually have a Bluetooth chip, but you can turn it on now. Wi-Fi, you can now have Wi-Fi connections. Their example was if you have a branch office where there's no wired connection. I call BS. I think this is for people who want to run server on their desktop. You can now set up email and accounts, Entra ID, Microsoft account, work or school account, all that stuff you can do in 2025. Windows Insider program for when you really want to beta test on production. dtrace, which is a native tool for debugging running code. Can't imagine that's for anybody but developers. You can also pin apps to the start menu. So our last thing, sorry, I'm running slightly over. Windows Update can now update your OS from 2022 or 2019 or 2016 to 2025. If you click the wrong button in Windows Update, you can upgrade the entire OS. I detest this with all of my being, but they chose to do it. They're called feature updates. They did this with Windows 11 as well, which created loads of fun support calls. Quality updates are now going to be CUs. According to Microsoft, only 1.5 to 4% of in-place upgrades fail. And so they feel like this is safe. You can also do media-based updates, so running setup.exe off an ISO. Presumably, you're already controlling what updates your servers get, so this won't be as big of a deal, but I don't like it at all. You can go straight from 2012 R2 and up to 2025. They are testing themselves with N-4 feature updates. So they're testing 2012 R2, 16, 19, 2022 with some set of apps they've chosen for every update. And they say it's 96% doesn't break the app. Sure, they're running none of my apps then. They say plan for 1 hour per server. And don't forget about activation. What's the best thing about the fact that you can now do in-place Windows updates is you can do your update and then not have a license to put on your server so that every 180 days it starts rebooting on you because you didn't get your license first. So this just opens up so many problems for me. But anyway, and if you didn't hear, WSUS is basically dead now. They've stopped all development. They've said they were going to for a long time, but they've basically killed it now. Here's some sources. Everything that I talked about, I started from the Windows Server 2025 What's New and the Windows Server Summit, and then branched from there into loads of other websites. I did not grab everything, but here's the start of it all. If you have any questions, post them over in the Q&A or the chat, and I will address those now. Thanks everybody for coming. If you have to jump while I answer questions, feel free. There is not an official release date yet for Server 2025. Based on history, every version of Windows Server except for 2016 came out between mid-September and mid-November. So I expect it's going to come out then, but they have not said anything specific. How many cores is Windows Server standard license? You buy your Windows licensing in 2-core packs with a minimum of 16. So the smallest you can buy is 16 cores. You can buy it in 2-core packs though, so you could also license for 18, 22, etc. Licensing this can be very confusing. We have several blog posts on our website that address that. QUIC addresses that, yep. What's replacing WSUS? Well, why aren't you in the cloud, of course? No, Microsoft wants you to use Intune and control stuff through that. Or use whatever other type of RMM you're using, Desktop Central or whatever from that standpoint. System Center Config Manager, of course, everyone runs System Center. There is not a clear replacement for WSUS. There's not like a WSUS v2 or something that does the same thing. Everything that replaces it does a lot of other stuff and is way more complicated. So any other questions from anyone? I don't see anything that is free. Well, Microsoft is a for-profit company, .com, not .org. So don't expect anything to truly be free. Anything changed with the RDP role? Nothing specific with the RDP role, aside from the things around if you're doing desktops with like GPUs and such, provisioning of those have changed somewhat. But a lot of the pains from RDS are a lot easier with Windows Admin Center. Oh, anything free to replace WSUS. All of your time to go manually install updates is basically your free replacement for WSUS. I know that's a flippant answer, but Microsoft has kind of cornered us here with no other answer. All right, still 50-something people around. Any more questions? All right, let's see. Windows Server 2025 will be a new schema. Will we need to install Active Directory schema for sudo configuration? Will Windows Server 2025 include POSIX attribute for... So I don't know the question specific around Linux that you're asking there. That's beyond my level of playing with the beta software. So that'll be one we'll have to get to. Yeah, the in-place upgrade basically comes along with Windows updates. So you're basically have to control the Windows updates in some way. I mean, by default, feature updates don't install. If you just next your way through Windows updates, it does a little pop-up at the bottom that says, hey, do you want new features? But yeah. Sorry for running over, everyone. There was a lot to try to cover. We'll get the slides to everybody, and you'll be able to see the links to where the knowledge came from there. Any reason not to keep 2022 until 2031? Well, I mean, it basically comes down to support stuff. So yeah, 2022 is supported for 5 years of mainstream, 5 years of extended support. So there's no reason you have to leave it immediately. If none of these features are of interest to you, then no reason to not go off 2022. Just keep in mind that it does take time to upgrade servers. So you probably don't want to stay on 2022 until 2031. You probably want to start upgrading, a couple of years before so you can get everything off. But there's no like core reason outside of everything we talked about here to really make the jump if you don't need to. I would never recommend going to 2025 until you've waited at least, I don't know, say 6 months post-release for updates and fixes, because Microsoft QA is sometimes questionable. All right, I think that might have finally been the last question. You guys can reach out to me directly if you need anything. Here's my email address. So if you have anything that comes up, you're free to reach out. You can also call us, Mirzan, and we can help you with anything. So everyone have a good afternoon, and see you next time.